Hello and welcome back. This is MC1 Gamer. This is a response video to Vince Ventrello's topic of the week. This one I thought was a great one. One of the really, conversation-provoking ones as far as Age of Sigmar is concerned, at the very least. And it has to do with comp with the Warhammer Age of Sigmar rule set. Now, before I get into that, I'm going to go and just show you some of the stuff that I've done. I want to show you a little bit of hobby time because I know a lot of my viewers, and if you're watching this, you're more than likely probably already somebody who's watched some of my videos. I've had just a real small handful, a minority of people that have said, hey, paint more. Well, I'm painting more. So before I get into the topic of conversation, I just want you to know I've heard you, and I've mentioned it in one of my recent bat refs, but I'm starting to paint more stuff. I've rebased a few things, like some of my Cryptars. These are my Werewolf Cryptars, and as you can see, I'm working on the bases, trying to finish some of these models off. And I'll get into my opinion in a second, but I just want to alleviate some of the concerns for some of my my followers that have, and this is not yet done, that I haven't really been pushing forward that part, and I've just been building more models and converting more stuff. I'm still converting, but I've been increasing the amount of, really been dedicating the last week or so and painting stuff up. Started on my Terrorgeist. You can see he's on an oval base now, with metal on the bottom so that it can stick to my the magnetic sheet that I have on my trays. He's all redded out because for the blood, but I've already gotten him with the wings. Already put that together. So this is going to look. I think this is going to look pretty good because I'm going to do all the flesh and all that stuff on the spines and the exposed bone and whatnot. And I'm going to do the same thing for the zombie dragon that I have. But the one that I've really been working on a lot is the Fel Pegasi that I have. They've been bare metal. A lot of people have made comments about them. I've worked on the flying bases. As you can see, they're masking taped so that I can spray clear. I can work on them and not have to worry about the clear acrylic that I've been using. And then I'm going to spray clear, obviously, a clear coat. And then this is what they're starting to look like. So as you can see, they have, Pegasus wings, but these are going to look, these are a little skeleton. They're falling apart. They're from the Tomb King's Carrion. They're in the black and yellow that are going to be the Mausolean colors, the Musalan colors. And I've got a little more work. I got some, dry brushing and shades that I'm going to do on this, and then on the wings, and then I'm going to put some, bloody flesh. I've got some washing and some highlights to do on the skin, the bone, and then of course I've got some more washes and shading to do on the black and yellow parts. So I've got a lot more to do, but this is really what it's going to look like. They're going to be in various different poses, like that and like that, and I've got about 6 of them. So I'm getting close to finishing those guys up. And once I do that, then I'll move on to some other stuff. I've rebased a few things. I'm starting to work on some characters, but you're going to see more. I'm going to try and limit. I've got my Blood Knights mostly converted up, but they haven't been painted yet. I've been working on the Vargulfs that I converted up a couple weeks back, and I'm redoing some of the Vargeists that I have. So I'm working on a paint scheme similar to the wings that you saw on the Terrorgeist. So it's going to have kind of like that reddish undertone with obviously, well, you'll see. But just know that I'm working on painting, and I'll show some pictures and maybe do a video on, convert this video so I can show how I made some of the conversions. But I'll save that for when I've actually completed each of these units and made some serious headway, because I know a lot of people have been interested in that, and they want to see some of these things look more impressive on the battlefield. So I'm making an effort. So getting to the actual topic. Do I play with comp? Do I play it straight? Let me just jump right in and just say I don't like any comp, any organized comp, and I need to really qualify this because there's a lot of layers to this and there's a lot of rationale that I have. So bear with me if you've watched to this point in this video. Don't just don't run away yet. Again, if you don't agree with me on any of my points of view, I respect that. Play the way you want. Play how you want. Play with whatever rules you want. I know summoning is a big topic of dissension, with a lot of people having different points of view on that too. If you don't agree with me, I have my point of view. I have a very strong point of view. I feel that there's a right way to play, but there is no wrong way to play. And I know it might sound counterintuitive, but it even says on the last page of the game, play the way you want. Change rules if you want. It actually puts it in there to try and encourage people to not wig out and lose their heads. But let me qualify some of the points when it comes to comp. In demoing a game like Age of Sigmar, where the rules are extremely flexible, I do put some limits on, because there's no point in playing a massive game, first of all, with somebody who's just trying to learn it. Even if they have a huge collection, if they've come over from 8th edition where they haven't started playing Age of Sigmar yet, maybe they had doubts, or they really didn't like a lot of the things that they've heard, or they read the War Scrolls or the rules, and they just didn't like what they saw on paper. This game plays so much differently on the table, especially as you play it and you start learning about it, than it does when you read it. It is a completely different game once you start getting it on the table and you actually try to explore a lot of the different possibilities. I have changed a ton of my opinions initially because of I've played about a little more than 24 games now, and every time I play, I've learned something new. It's unlocked something. I played different armies, and while I've not played all of the different armies, I've been doing the unlocking videos, so if you haven't seen them, feel free to go check those out. And I've learned a ton about each of the armies and and the units they're in, and a lot of the synergies, and not just how powerful some things can be, but how they could be countered, and how the conceptions that we have are really misconceptions based on ideas that we may have had from 8th edition and earlier editions of Warhammer that don't really apply to Age of Sigmar. So the idea of comp, it really doesn't need to be comped, but when I demo with somebody, meaning it could be a friend or somebody new that, hey, I want to try this out. Great, when I finish this game, we'll put some stuff on the table and we'll just go over the rules, and you can see if you like, the mechanics of the game. I've done that a ton of times, and I don't even count those like little games as I played full-on games, over 24. So those little games, I've probably done another, 10 or 12 of those. So and those last, 30 minutes, 20 minutes, they're not really that long. They, it's just 2 or 3 units, and sometimes we don't even put in, magic, just try and get some of the mechanics down. But the game changes as you add more stuff. So I choose to play, though, when I play games, as pure as possible, and I'm still exploring the rules, as we all are. So again, cool your jets if you have a specific feeling about how some of these rules are. We're still learning a lot of stuff, and there's people that disagree. If you feel strong one way about one rule, and play it your way, or play it somebody else's way if they disagree, and then play it your way in a different game, and you might find that even if you don't feel it's right, it may feel cooler or more, just more interesting, even if it may not be the way you interpret the wording. I mean, we were talking about 4 pages of rules, and then people say, "Oh, it's only 4 pages of rules. It's for kids. It's checkers, it's not chess." There are 400 War Scrolls and counting. The rules are an ever-growing, living, set of documents, and the game is going to change, and the ideas of how the game is going to be played is going to change as more things are released. So you can't just say it's just 4 rules. It's 4 pages of core rules that make up the basic mechanics of the game, and then all the War Scrolls just make that much more complex. Combinations and synergies, and just the idea of how some are units that actually break some of the rules, like being able to run and shoot, or being able to run and charge. All those things are, unit by unit, based on each of the War Scrolls. They change the game. And if you try to limit that, if you try to neuter it, then what you're doing is you're not playing the game. You're not learning how to really play the game, and you're not exploring some of the possibilities and the potential of what Age of Sigmar is, and how it might actually self-correct itself in a lot of ways, because initially a lot of people are just running to the comp systems. And I know that a lot of the tournament organizers, and I feel for them. I understand their frustrations. They have had a long history of running events at stores, tournament competitions, big events, GTs, and now you have a rule set system that really isn't built for that, and I don't think it ever will be. It really is putting a square peg in a round hole. But if you want to adapt it, we've already seen, and we've already had examples of successful events that have been done with some form of comp. So you can comp it, but you don't need to. And that's what my point that I'm going to try to make here with all these different bullets that I have. I have a sheet of paper, or rather, a Word document here, with all the different details that I'm talking about. So I'm hoping that you'll hear me out on this. But if you really feel that you need to comp, what I'm really going to get to is don't overdo it. My message is ultimately try to play the game pure. Try to play several games pure. Scale up. Play games without magic first, and then introduce that, after a couple games. Get to know how the movement phase works. Get to know the phases. Get to know the flexibility of how you can form your units, and how that might affect close combat and pile-ins and the like. Get to know all that stuff. Then get to know magic and synergies with units. Really just throw stuff on the table and play, because those are the models you want. And then if you really feel that things are getting out of control after playing, then you can change the game as you want. And if comp is what you want, then go ahead and do that. But all these ideas of comp systems that people are posting on my videos and putting out there as the new gospel for what Warhammer Age of Sigmar should be, because it doesn't have it and it needs it, it's a fallacy. It's what you desire and what you feel comfortable with, and if that's what you like, great, go and do it. If that's what makes it fun for you, go and do it. But the game doesn't need it. You probably need it. You may not even realize that you don't need it, but that's the convention that you're coming from, though, so that's the type of game that you've been playing. And if you are inserting that overlay onto Age of Sigmar, you're not really playing Age of Sigmar. You're playing a version of Age of Sigmar. This has always been the case with Warhammer in all the previous editions. There's been the rules as they've been printed. People had different interpretations of them and had different ideas of what was overpowered and underpowered based on what GW gave us. And then they, all over the regions all over the U.S. and U.K. and Europe and Australia and New Zealand, all throughout the world, people have different forms of comp. Even within their own country, there's different forms. You could go down the block, much less across the other side of your nation. You go down the block to a different game store, and there'll be different levels of comp. People are playing a different version of this game everywhere, so it really doesn't matter whether you want to comp or not. It's just try the game the way it's played first before you decide immediately that it needs it and what it needs. And again, I'm going to explain to you what my experience has been and what I feel that if you really do need to comp, what you shouldn't do. Not that you shouldn't do it. You may not need it. If you want it, go ahead. But try not to overdo it. So let me go through some of this list. First of all, I have found with these games, and look, the first couple games I played were a mess. We were all still learning how Age of Sigmar is played. We're all still learning the potential of what Age of Sigmar is. That's kind of the beauty of a 4-page basic core rule set. It's just the mechanics. And we're still exploring that and unlocking it. That's why I titled my series Unlocking Age of Sigmar, because we're just at the beginning parts of really learning the complexity and all the potential of what this game is. When 8th edition came out, the game was far, far different in the way it was played than it was at the very tail end before End Times came out. People played with far different strategies and far different combinations, and as more books were released, they found different levels of power. And then they changed that if they wanted to in a organized tournament sense. They changed the limits that they imposed, but that was artificial. That's this, Swedish comp and ETC, and again, different stores and different East Coast versus West Coast. It's just a different way of looking at things and what you feel that is the way you want to play, or if you ever want to have an organized event, what you feel is overpowered. It's some idea of trying to balance. Let me just hit on that word balance. You don't really need balance. In an organized tournament, you might need it. It depends on the kind of tournament you're playing. If you're playing more of a narrative type, event, you don't need balance. You have objectives. You may put some limits on there, but you may not have to. If somebody wants to bring, a whole stack of of models, fine. But as long as you have table space and the available space for those people that want to do that. But if you're looking to really make it a competitive type game, a hyper-competitive game is the way I describe it, you're probably going to need to put some limits on. But if you're just playing a game with your friends at the local store, the way Age of Sigmar is built, is to play chains of games. They're quicker, they're faster, the rules are much more streamlined. You're not going to have to look into the book more, so you're going to get through more games. Even large games are going to be faster. And the idea is that these games are supposed to have connections to each other. There's a triumph system that kind of rewards you for your previous victory, for example. There are narrative scenarios that string different types of objectives together in order to play through a story, which are far more interesting than even the end times ones, which were ridiculous in some respects. Some were good, some weren't. And even past scenario books, I think that the Age of Sigmar ones are far superior than anything I've seen so far with Warhammer's scenarios, in my opinion. But you can insert any armies in there, and it doesn't really tell you what you can and cannot take. In most respects, it just gives you objectives. So you have to achieve the objectives. So let's talk again about a little bit about balance. If you're trying to do a recreation type game, try and emulate some historical scenario or just the idea of war and infuse it into a fantasy environment, well, good luck with that. That's a heavy lift. But if you're trying to use conventional warfare, historical warfare as a benchmark, again, a tough reach there. But no battle is ever even. There's never the Allies and the Axis in World War II didn't line up and say, okay, you've got too many tanks. Well, you've got too much aircraft. We need to put a cap on this stuff. No battle was ever even. Okay, there was never not one single battle. I just venture to guess that at least, even if they had the same troops with the same training and the same equipment, one guy probably had one more bullet. That's uneven right there. But let's just look at from the standpoint of some of the scenarios that you can make that can be profoundly fun. It can be tremendously fun. And I always use this example. Take a look historically at the last stand of the 300, the Battle of Thermopylae, or Thermopylae. I don't know if I'm not pronouncing that right. Don't jump on my case, because potato, guys. I have my accent. You may be from a different country, have your accent, and I may just be mispronouncing it. Just let's look past that, because I know there's some people that really have kind of a little bit of a stick up their butt about if things being pronounced exactly the way they want it. And if I butchered that, my apologies. But that battle, you had the Persians, who had probably about, historically they said 1 million men. It wasn't. They had probably about 250,000 troops. But that's arguable, of course. And there were supposedly only 300 Spartans, but there were about 7,000 or 8,000 levies or other troops from the local area. But they weren't Spartans. They were Greeks, but they weren't to the level. They weren't from Sparta. This is a hugely unbalanced game if you try to emulate that kind of level of unevenness. But if you look at what happened, there was a terrain structure, there was an objective, there was an overall strategic idea of what was going on in the war, delay tactics. There was a whole fleet battle that had an impact on that. Even though one side got obliterated over the course of time, they were able to hold up an army long enough that they achieved a strategic victory in the end. Okay, and there's a number of these examples. You cannot play a scenario like that and go over the course of several games, play a chain that gives you that connective narrative if you try to even out the games all the time. Sometimes you have a last stands type scenario, and there's even a couple scenarios like this in the Age of Sigmar hardcovers. And there are other games where you might have reinforcements coming in, you have recycling of new units, and these things create an imbalance. So if you're playing these types of scenarios, which you could easily play in a tournament environment, you would have to change them entirely or throw them out the window if you try to establish some artificial comp. You're not going to have an even game based on how these things are built. That's what Age of Sigmar is about. So just understand that the idea of balance is not necessary. You can play this game and have a tremendously competitive event, or just some series of games with you and your local buddies, or pick-up games with people without having any kind of comp, if that's the kind of thing that you enjoy. Now, my experience has been that it's self-correcting. There's always some level of comp. I need to qualify this, because I think I might sometimes misrepresenting myself when I say it. We've all always played with some level of comp. You go and you meet somebody for the first time, or even somebody you've known for years that you play, and one of the first things you probably say is, what kind of a game are we playing? You may have organized it before you got to the store or got to the person's house, or they came to yours, but there's always been that, okay, well what are we looking to play? Or let's play this. That's a level of comp. You have a social contract, you speak, you have an interaction, and you decide the kind of game or games that you're playing. And it could be, well, we only have this limited amount of time. It's, and we're meeting after work or something. or what happens with me a lot, I'll make dinner plans with the family on a Saturday, but I'll play in early part of the day. We go over when the game store opens, and I have a limited amount of time, so there's only a limited amount of games. And if it's a huge game, it might only be one, but it might be for small and medium-sized games 2 or 3. So I speak with my opponents, or several opponents sometimes, and I say to them, let's keep it to like kind of like a smaller mid-level, not tiny, but we're not going to go and bring our whole collections, or if we do, we're not going to play our whole collections. And that's fine. That's a level of comp, and that's that social contract level. I've found that works more often than not just fine. It's worked in every case. It's worked just fine, and without having to say anything else. That is a form of comp, but that social contract has corrected the issue of no structure and how to build a list for Age of Sigmar. I find that a lot of the people who are trying to infuse or impose this idea of comp are just bombarding the airwaves with the idea of these really restrictive levels of comp, haven't just played pure Age of Sigmar and allowed that normal, organic way of playing to work. And I understand, because the first games I played were kind of a mess as we were learning things. The game has opened up so much more since then, and I like the idea of just playing pure Age of Sigmar. And if there's those limitations for whatever reasons, they don't have to be a list of 0 to 3 this or 1 to 2 of that, or maximum wounds or stuff like that, or X number of war scrolls. They don't need to be, but they can, and I'll go address that. Again, things like summoning that a lot of people said are overpowered, and it's powerful, but it's not overpowered. And things like measuring from the model, or overpowered shooting, the concept of shooting being ridiculous, because one unit, the Bretonnian archers, can once per game, shoot quadruple their shots. Things like no point structure, no army composition limits. Those things irked me too when I first started playing Age of Sigmar, and I was teetering on whether or not I'd play this game, whether or not I'd give up on it. And I just said, I'm going to test the shit out of it, and I'm still testing the shit out of it. But I decided I'm not going to let it limit me. I have the models, I have a collection, I'm nowhere near done with all the conversions that I'm hoping to finish, and I'm not going to just give up on that unless I really give this a kind of a good try. And as I've played more and more, I've actually liked these things. Measuring from the model doesn't bother me as much as it used to. You just got to look past what you think are shenanigans early on, and the conventions, again, of 8th edition and the rank and file, everybody having one specific range of capability. You look past this concept, and it doesn't matter. As long as people aren't trying to model for advantage, and you'll know that if they are, it really doesn't matter. And even if they are modeling for advantage, they're getting the disadvantage on top of that, because if they're closer to you, you're closer to them. And I understand the idea of stacking models, where you have a reach over or between. You know what? I look at my Coven Throne. At first I was like, hey, that's going to overhang models. I can sit that right behind models. That's kind of an unfortunate thing. That shouldn't work that way. But then again, the people who were able to attack that model back, even because I had that extended reach, well, they were able to go and target that. That's a very important asset. And as it gets wounded, it's going to get weaker. And I'll address that in a second, about how monsters and large models are not necessarily overpowered, that there's a counter. All right, so all these things that really irked me early on, they've kind of corrected itself. I've changed my opinion on a lot of this stuff. I've also changed my opinion on it because of playing and learning and seeing how things are countered and how they can be addressed, and how you can deal with these different things that seem on paper to be just outrageously powerful. There are counters, and there's other outrageously powerful things that you can also bring that are just as crazy, and it's just a matter. There's an armed control concept to that. If everybody's got the superpowered monsters and units, then it really doesn't matter. It's just a matter of what you decided to bring that day, and then it comes down to tactics. Let's go to some of the other points that I was looking to address. Games are faster. So if a game is one-sided, it tends to be that these types of games, most games in general, they really don't go past game, even 2 or even more likely 3 turns. I've rarely played any of these games where it really went to turn 4 or 5 or even 6. think I played one game that went all the way to 6, or maybe a couple more than that, but not too many. The games get decided pretty quickly, and they move faster, and then you can get through more games. So if one game seemed to be really overpowered, the next game might not. They kind of, again, they self-correct in more ways than we're giving credit for this game, especially when you first look at it. And after only a couple of plays, again, it's not a good enough test. I think a lot of people are giving up on Age of Sigmar or trying to change it before they've really given it a good shot. Just play it the way it is and see, and then make up your mind. Scenarios and sudden death have helped the outmatched side more often than not. And it's not perfect, but I will say it again. The scenario objectives and things like sudden death, especially sudden death, have resulted in the outmatched player winning more often than not. Things like summoning, somebody who's over-summoned, better be tabling you, or they're not going to win based on a minor victory result, which is what happens when you haven't tabled your opponent, and unless, of course, you're playing a scenario with specific objectives. So I have, even with crazy powerful summoning capabilities, you have to be very smart about how you summon and when. Otherwise, you're just asking for a defeat. It may be fun to put all your extra models on the table and kill 99% of your opponent. From your perspective, you may enjoy that, but your opponent's going to walk away with certainly a moral victory because they've got that one model that escaped. They won the game, and if that's what your objective is, if that's what you're looking to get out of the game, a victory, as opposed to the fun, the challenge maybe of overcoming surmountable odds, or a challenge of dealing with a much bigger, stronger army, or achieving objectives, with an uphill battle in that respect, that could be in and of itself fun. But if you are looking to try to create an even balanced game, you're just not going to get it. All you're doing is creating a different set of rules that's going to create what is balanced, or imbalanced rather, about Age of Sigmar, the same way as every other edition that Comp has done. So if you want to do it again, just don't overdo it, because we already have the levels of Comp that are from a dialogue with your opponent, and just from from that again, that whole social contract thing that we use. We use that word a lot when we talk about this, but I don't think we're overusing that, because I think it really is there. If you're putting out your whole collection every time, you're not going to get many opponents to play you. And if you're looking to overdo it every time with these supremely powerful things, people use the 10 Bloodthirster concept. I've yet to see anybody with 10 Bloodthirsters, but I'm sure that we'll eventually see it. That person's not going to get a whole lot of games, or they're going to get some games where people are going to try and challenge them with something to go and ruin their day, and they might figure that out, which I bet you they will. But if it becomes a situation where it's just too much, it's just not fun for somebody to play that, guess what? That guy's not going to get any games, and then what's going to happen is they're going to have all these wonderful models and never going to play them. So, okay, let's move on. So one of the reasons why I say don't overdo, the comp if you're going to have an organized comp, is because a lot of the garbage units, or the core units that were like the default must include section in previous versions of Age of Sigmar, they've been boosted, and they've been boosted with a lot of accelerants based on volume in a quantity of models. So some are at 10, some are at 20 models in units, some are at 30. If you put caps on, you're eliminating that potential. And yes, all wounds are not the same. I'm going to get to that in a second, but the idea of those units now being boosted because of the number of models is fantastic. You take skeletons and you get 30 skeletons, and they're all getting extra attacks. You get zombies, and they're all getting pluses to hit when they get like 30 or 40 of them. They're all like 3 pluses. That's why you take that many. And if you put a cap at 25 or at 30 and just a couple of archer shots and suddenly it eliminates that, it's a waste of that concept. And while that is going to happen over the course of the game, you shouldn't ditch it just because of one round of attacks. That one wound suddenly negates 10 of the models in the unit in terms of the upgrade that they get because of the quantity. don't put an artificial cap. If somebody wants to take, a 40 or 50 in a unit, well, guess what? There are things that counter that. There are abilities that attack every model in the unit. So good luck taking 50 of something and then having to deal with that, because then they're going to get hit every single model with those abilities. It's not a template situation. You take a look at some of the monsters that are in the game, and you'll see that they do large numbers of attacks, and they could wipe through or rip through some of those units. But the flip side is that those units are very effective at countering a monster type character or monster, or war machine type unit, because those take a few wounds and they start diminishing in their power. They start going down the scale in their chart and get less attacks and do less damage, and and they get weaker. And you take a unit of just crap, models from the previous edition, or even this edition rather, and suddenly they're so much more powerful, and they can actually really diminish these monsters. So you can't equate 12 wounds of a monster to 12 wounds of a rank and file, formerly known as core unit. It doesn't equal. But 40 of them might equal the power and capability of a monster at 12 wounds. So don't equate those. And there's no algorithm that's going to perfectly match those up, nor really should it. You might have this mathematical equation, and somebody down the street might just say, hey, we're just going to wing it, and you guys might have completely different experiences. But the idea of how the game is played, it's fundamentally changed. Try and just see how those things work and learn how those situations apply before you throw in a comp system, and I think you'll find that your conclusions are going to be different based on those experiences. So unit caps, I don't like unit caps, but I do have a point with some comp suggestions I have where some unit caps could have some give and take, so I'll get there. Wounds is also not an equalizer, as I just mentioned. So I already mentioned the thing about large monsters. I've seen it on battle reports, and I've seen it on the table where I've played, where those garbage units. I've seen a unit of 30 or 40 clan rats devour a bloodthirster, and in my case, I've seen some monster units that have been taken down substantially, very quickly actually, by a unit of ghouls or skeletons, which almost never would have been the case in a previous edition. But large numbers of them, like 30 or 40, and the wound structure, is not equal. So, but the power structure changes with the rules and the model count. So keep that in mind. Good shooting can just tremendously reduce the power of a monster or a war machine that has 12 or 15 wounds. But they're not going to look the same in most of these algorithm or type comp systems. Play it out and see how it works before you do that. All right, so shooting and ambushing units, they can take monsters down a peg also. There are counters to these supposedly overpowered and unbalanced models that are not the sum of their wounds. They're much greater or lesser than the sum of their wounds. So I look at units that may seem like they're overpowered, but they're good at countering certain situations. It's that rock paper scissors thing. There's plenty of that here, so you've got to explore that before you start imposing some of these comp systems. Learn about how that stuff works, and then you'll come to better conclusions. So the things that I've learned, there are more counters to things like shooting and summoning and magic in general than a lot of people have given credit. There are things that can enhance those situations or hurt them. There are units that limit your capability for shooting if they get it within range. There are some artificial, there's some base rules that you can prevent some of these abilities for shooters to shoot multiple times if you get close enough. Those are big deals. For many summoning units, of spells, you have to be a certain distance away from your opponent, and large clusters of units can control areas of the board, limiting the ability for your opponent to summon units in any meaningful way, near where major objectives are, or near where the clusters of where the action is taking place. There are some units that break that don't take that into consideration. They're rare, but they exist, and those are gems. Those units, and those things are other ways to counter that method of preventing you from summoning and bringing units onto the board. So you have to look at the game in total. There's so much dimension, and until you play and look at all of the armies, you're just creating something that is going to take a lot of the magic out of some of the games, the magic out of some of these units, and the magic out of some of these armies. When I say magic, I mean some of the stuff that makes it unique and fun. You're going to remove that capability, and you're also going to remove something that's probably the most profoundly important thing about Age of Sigmar, and that is play what you want. My son is a perfect example of this, and I didn't realize this was going to be the experience, but when I decided I was going to do Age of Sigmar, as many of you who watch my channel probably know, I brought him into a store. He wanted to spend some of his birthday money. I said, okay, we're going to buy a few boxes of stuff. What do you want? And he said, Giant, Mastodon, or Thundertusk, and the ogres. We bought those as the starter boxes, and we've expanded since then. Now he's got 3 giants, a Thundertusk, a Stonehorn, a whole bunch of Mornfang. I've contributed obviously more than his initial seed money from his birthday money, but he's got a sizable army. I've borrowed it and used it and made some battle reports with it too. It's tough. He's rolled me twice now against a really tough array of big stuff from the undead army, and but it was fun. Why should, if little Timmy wants to be able to get 3 or 4 or 5 giants or 3 dragons, let him. That's the beauty. You don't need to get boxes and boxes of stuff to put it on the table and play the game. You could start with less, or just a few things that are just specific choices and play. Let that happen. That can be a game, and if in an organized sense, it still can be. It's going to have benefits. It's going to have disadvantages. You've just got to test it out before you start, restricting it. If somebody buys those models, they want to play it. I have a Nagash model that I've converted up, and I want to play it sometimes. And there's certainly plenty of counters to Nagash. You take a unit of Chameleon Skinks, and first turn, Nagash is going to be down to just a few wounds, if not dead. A couple of War Machines will rock him, even though he's got an ability to take a 4-up versus some of those mortal wound type of things. He's not going to survive long enough unless I play a smart game or I get lucky. There's going to be ways to take that character out because so much of this game is brutally killing, even the garbage units. So you really have to look at that and understand that it's even the most powerful of these characters. If you limit them, you're taking a part out of the game, and you're limiting somebody to be able to play the stuff that they want to play and they want to model. Even in a tournament, let these guys be placed on the table. There's going to be limitations, I'm sure, that you're going to put into place, but don't overdo them. And this is where I go to the next part. I don't like the overbearingness of comp. When I say I don't like comp, I'm also, that's my argument, that there's a lot of things that are kind of just organically comped from discussion and otherwise, and just common sense. You want to be reasonable. Let's talk about what kind of game that we're playing, and then we'll act accordingly. I've never put Nagash on the table, for instance, unless I've said to the person, hey, you want to play against Nagash? If they say no, I don't place him. And most of the time, I don't even ask. I mean, I don't even bother to bring him, is what I mean. He's only come out a handful of times. I can count on, I'll have fingers left over if I count on, 2 hands. I played him in a tournament, so I can't use one hand. But in any case, it's been less than 10. I think I played him 7 times, maybe 6 times. That's not a lot, especially for an expensive model. But I'd like to know that I can play him. I'd love to know that I can put him out there in certain situations. Same thing with any of the other Uber monsters. Why shouldn't you have, if you wanted, 4 dragons? Well, that's going to be an obstacle that you should have, that somebody's going to have to try and deal with. So let them do it. Let them do it. It'd be a lot lighter carrying that too than entire model range. In any case, if you're going to do comp, my point is be flexible. And when I say by be flexible, I mean things like, for instance, give a large range of War Scroll options. I've seen a couple of good ones, and I've seen a whole lot of bad ones, but I can't really judge too much because just like I'm saying, try it, you might like it. Well, I haven't tried those either, and I don't know. But I just rather people try to play the game more pure than before they start changing it. But again, let me go back to it. If you want to institute comp because you just can't get past the idea of playing a game where one game to the next is not going to be the same perfect balance in your mind, or if you're trying to create an event that you don't want it to be just a narrative, you want it to be very competitive, okay, make a large range of war scrolls that people can bring. I've seen some where you can bring up to 15, but you only can deploy in one game 8 or 10. It gives people a range of options, and they can change up from game to game what they want to bring based on what the scenario is. And I like that. It gives people choice. Choices are what matters, and that's the idea. You don't want to take the spark out of Age of Sigmar. You want to keep that there, that flexibility, that choice. Don't take that away or make it so much so that you're limiting the choices so much so that it just doesn't pay to even play some of these models. But you want to limit the number of war scrolls so somebody doesn't bring boxes and boxes of stuff filling up every square inch of the table. Okay, I get that. Time constraints as well. I get that. Don't overdo it, please. Make a need for people to make choices that sacrifice the amount of war scrolls they can take in a game if they want to, for instance, take an excessively large unit of troops. So, here's an example. If you want to put an artificial cap of 25 or 30 wounds on a unit in a specific war scroll choice, if somebody wanted to add, take an extra, amount to get to 40, that would take a second war scroll choice. The first war scroll choice is just an idea. Could be limited to 25, but that second one is only worth 15. They have limited the amount of war scrolls that they can take, so they can take one unit that is larger than normal. Okay, you don't put a cap of wounds on a structure like that, but you make people have choices of what they take within each of those war scroll choices. Okay, if they took a monster, well, that's going to probably be 12 or 14 wounds, but they could have had a cap of 25 rank and file guys. That's a choice. Don't limit, in my opinion, the amount of monsters that can be taken. Because if somebody takes 5 or 6 monsters and somebody else takes 5 or 6 units of 40 strong rank and file, I don't know if this is true or if this would be the case, but I'd still put my money on the rank and file. That's a lot of models. That's a lot of wounds that those monsters still need to get through, and battle shock tests are not always going to do it, especially depending on what the units are, and at what those units have in terms of accelerant capabilities at those large numbers. The right units, they'll rip through those monsters and have models left over. So unit for against unit, they'll still do better. So, well, again, that's just a blanket statement. We don't know; it's not been tested, but I would venture to guess, based on my experience, that would be the case more often than not. Be interesting to find out, but I would say, why limit that? What if somebody wanted to have a herd of giants or a bunch of dragons? There are things that are going to make that choice a bad choice in the game, because so many things that are more killy versus those monsters and those big creatures and characters than they used to be. All right, so other things. Large units have diminishing returns in terms of the wounds that they take, so they're going to diminish over time. That's a big deal. And making the choices, where I wanted to get with diminishing returns is make the diminishing returns be if somebody wants to take larger units. Make it so that if they dedicate another war scroll towards getting a unit of a greater size, make it that every time they dedicate a war scroll, it's reduced, the amount they get. So maybe this is my idea of comp. I don't know if other people are doing it, but let's say the first choice you get of a war scroll is 25 wounds max cap. Second war scroll you choose, is 15. So now you have a 40. 2 war scrolls, you get 40, and then the third one is only 10. So for 3 war scrolls you get 50, but you've dedicated 3 war scrolls. If each of those was 25 wounds, then you'd have 75 wounds worth of unit as opposed to 50. That's my point, the diminishing returns. Put a situation like that in, because that one large unit with the accelerants, the force, the multiplier rules that make them better when they have larger volume, larger quantity, those things really come into play, and they do factor and matter. And I think if you want to make some limitations, don't prevent somebody from taking them. Just make them make it at a certain cost. Same thing when it comes to the numbers of creatures, monsters, and whatnot. Limiting characters, for example, that drives me crazy just as much, nearly as much as the whole monster thing, because I think that the monsters there's a built-in that diminishing profile is a very big deal, and it matters. But things like not allowing people to take unique characters. Now, they're not all Nagash, okay? Nagash is a special case, and I'm sure we're going to see other characters get released that are going to be comparable to him. But even with Nagash, I'm talking about the idea of special characters being completely eliminated, or you have to take 3 or 4 or 5 War Scroll choices to take one guy. That's absurd. It's absolutely absurd. Nagash is not worth 100 models on the other side of the table. He is not. Okay, he will die to a large enough arrow fire or a large enough unit of ambushers. Or if he gets swarmed by 100 models, he is not going to. They're going to get to him and kill him. Okay, I fail to see why people don't know this, and I think the only reason is why people haven't played it, because they've comped it out and they haven't allowed those situations to unfold. But the idea of being able to take unique characters is also preventing people from taking things like substitute War Scrolls. Not all the models ranges have War Scrolls. Or if they have a War Scroll, something similar to them have been, weren't included with a War Scroll, and the bottom of these lists have said, use this one. Well, what about using a Rune Lord with an anvil? They say go use Thoric. Well, Thoric has special abilities from being a unique character. Well, I don't want to play Thoric, but I want to play a Rune Lord with an anvil. I want an anvil, so it says to play that. Why is that a problem? Let people play that. Or how about a Bretonnian Lord on a Griffin? Well, there's no Bretonnian Lord on a Griffin War Scroll. The substitute War Scroll that you use for that is King Louis. King Louis is a unique character. But these guys are not that powerful. They have nice abilities. I mean, let people play these things. And don't make it that they have to spend 3 or 4 War Scrolls to take them. They are substitute War Scrolls for generic versions of these guys. Why do they do that? Another reason is probably because some of the named characters are not alive now in Age of Sigmar's new millennia. But you have the models. You want to play it. I want to play a Rune Lord on an anvil. I should be able to play it. I don't have to play Thoric, but it's the same War Scroll profile. And it's not overpowered. It's really good. But I have that model. I want to play him. Why should that be limited? Allow it to be brought to a game. All right. The old Anvil stunk in 8th edition with the updated rules. Now it has more interesting rules. Same thing with some of these monsters. The point being, make up your own mind, but give it a shot first. If you like comp, have fun with it. If you want an overabundance of it, if you really want to restrict the game, and that's the game that you want to play, fine. This is your fun. No, the comp police are not going to come and knock down your door. Or same as the rules police are, and if you have different views on rules, you can play the way you want. And if you and your group enjoy it, go ahead and do it. And if you want to make an event that has a huge overlay of rules to limit or restrict or change the way the game is played, great. If it brings people into the game, I think that's wonderful. I mean, it's better than the game not being played. But try playing through the game. This is my suggestion. Try playing the game as often as you can without this first. Or continue to play it without this. And you'll learn more about how this game is played and how the rules allow for a lot of self-correction. Is it perfect? No, by no means. But no game is. I have never said that I thought Age of Sigmar was perfect. There are still things that I have a little bit of a problem with, but I'm willing to accept those as challenges because I like some of the other things, and those are opinions that have changed. Why? Because I played the game, and I didn't put a restriction on myself. I just said, you know what, let's see what this is like before I formulate an opinion. And guess what? I'm still formulating that opinion. But in the end, what I say is, try the game, explore and experiment. Don't play just with these overly restrictive levels of comp, And if that's what you enjoy, great, more power to you. But there, I'll leave it at that. Have a great day, everybody.